I'm going to start off by showing you, to get some context of the space you're in, we worked with our Street View team to actually go inside the Frick and try and give users who can't possibly access these museums an understanding of the space. And it's pretty dark on the screen, but it's not like that on the laptop. But you can jump around the rooms. I think most of you are familiar with Street View. You can decide if you want to jump the floor plan and, let's say, go right outside into the beautiful courtyard. And like this, we've done Street View for the Hermitage, for MoMA, for Met, for the NGMA in New Delhi, for the Taipei National Palace Museum in Taiwan. It's really, really got geographical coverage. So now let's go to the exciting part, the Zoom part, for lack of a better word. So I'm going to start with MoMA. And I think most of you are aware of, the Starry Night. And, I've been, during the last few years, I've learned a lot about art. I have no art background, just FYI. And I was told that, Van Gogh was very famous for his heavy brushstroke, but I never actually understood what this meant. I just kept reading it in books. Curators kept telling me this. But I really understood it because I could now actually see what that means. Please keep in mind, we're on a live internet connection, so there's nothing cached, there's no software here, it's a live, it's a browser, right? And imagine anybody in the world with an internet connection, a fast one, can actually start understanding what it means to see these brushstrokes. I'm going to zoom out just so we kind of get some perspective of how deep we were. And that's where we are, all right? So I have a few other things to show, so I'm going to jump quickly. And the next thing I want to show you is, the breadth. And for that, let's see the Yale Center for British Art. Now, the Yale Center for British Art has given around 5,000 images in this project, and it really is a collection that you can spend probably an entire month just going through. Each one of these images has, of course, the zoom capabilities, but it's not just about zooming in and out of art. It's also about understanding more about them, reading the information that we get from the partners. And what if you're like me and you don't know much about the museums, you don't know much about art, but for example, we have 32,000 high-resolution artworks now in this project, and you just like gold. I like gold, I'm Indian. I've been told that I should invest in gold. So, this really shows you every single work that has a gold reference across 140 museums. So you're really starting to filter and starting to understand art from a different dimension. I'm not going to waste too much time onto the filter stuff. I'm just actually going to move to another zoom image. So I showed you brushstrokes. Now I'm going to show you how important this gets for paintings that have extreme detail. So let's go to the Met. I'm in the Met's collection now, and I'm back to one of my favorites, the Harvesters. I've been told it's popular demand. I should show this one. So there's a lot going on in this painting by Peter Bruegel. I think most of you know it. If you don't, please go see it at the Met. It's an amazing painting. But when you see it the next time, remember what I'm going to show you now. You're going to start zooming in. A lot of activity. A little siesta going on. Some food being eaten. This guy's staring at me. And I'm going to zoom out a little bit and start trying to see what's going on here, really far away. And we noticed, a kind of a gathering, a game, I don't know what, somebody's throwing sticks at something. At first I thought this is slightly dark, but then I spoke to the people at the Met, and they told me this is actually a tradition where they're throwing sticks at a geese to celebrate something called Shrove Tuesday. Now, I don't really care about Shrove Tuesday that much, but when I saw this, I actually started Googling about this tradition, trying to understand more about it, and just so we understand, we can't actually see the sad face of this goose or geese, but I'm going to zoom out so you can get, again, a perspective of how deep we were. So next time you're in front of the harvesters at the Met, try to really get immersive into the painting. And so I think I'm going to stop now, but just give you two important things. One is something called user galleries. So we have all this great content. We have all these users around the world. Now what if they want to start making their own little galleries, without anybody telling them what they should and shouldn't be seeing? This is the most successful feature of this entire product. It's called user galleries. We've got around 7,000 public galleries and hundreds of thousands of private ones that people have not made public. These are all user galleries. I don't know any of these people who've made them, but you should just see what people are coming up with. Some people had all the apples in the Google Art project because they're fascinated with the apples. I don't know if that's important, if it's not important, but it's getting people interested in art again. And finally, I'm going to end by just showing you very, very quickly, if I can, the entire list of partners that we have. And right below here, which you can't see because the projection system won't allow it, there's a map that shows the coverage in all the 40 countries. And I think pretty much every continent is represented. Thank you. And now I'm going to introduce you to Blake, who's going to take it from here. Thank you.
Well, let me just say, Amit, that I am possibly the biggest enthusiast for the Google Art project. I used to be an art historian, and the idea that I can get deep into pictures that matter to me, or maybe access to pictures that I've never been able to get to in the flesh, and study them as though they're on an operating table is amazing for me. As a former professional, that's very important. But I guess I'd say that one of the problems with the Google Art project is that you've left something out of what pictures are. It's almost as though you couldn't reproduce the color red, and all the pictures are being reproduced without the color red. And one of the crucial things, the crucial thing that you've left out, is space. And what I'd like to claim, there we go again. What I've done a lot of research on is the way that pictures aren't just what's within the frame, that where they are and the space around them is central to how artists in history have thought about pictures. So this picture, for instance, in the Academia in Venice, gives you an idea of the way in which the artist wants the space in the room to continue into the picture. And that's something really important that I'm worried about getting lost in the Google Art project. And it's something that we've lost as a culture in general. With the advent of slides and reproductions in books, we think that pictures are sort of transportable, that works of art are transportable, and that it doesn't matter how you see them or where you see them, so long as you get access to that little rectangle, you've got what the picture is. But I think pictures are very importantly objects in the world with us, and they're objects in specific spaces with us. And it really worries me that people may start thinking that when they access the Google Art project, and I know that you always say, this is not the art, this is just a way of accessing it, there is that danger of blurring those boundaries.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with you. I've had these conversations with so many museums when I try to convince them to join this project, and a lot of them had these similar concerns. And my view, and maybe it's just because I have no clue about art, I don't come from this world, I don't really, I've not respected the boundaries of this world very much. What I've tried to do is really speak to these people in the museums and try and say, what's the middle ground, right? And I think what they've said is, well, let's look at this. If we have to reach new audiences around the world, yes, there's a risk that people will start ignoring the context of an artwork, but perhaps it'll motivate them to actually travel to the physical space once they get a taste of what it is. And that, to be honest, is my hope, because what's happened to me, my family, my friends, anyone who's exposed to Google Art Project and I've interacted with, their museum attendance and desire to see works of art in a physical space has actually increased. And I'm just hoping people understand that space is important.
Yeah, I'm just worried in general. I tend to think of museums and works of art as incredibly fragile, delicate objects, delicate ecosystems that are in peril right now, and that have to compete with people's smartphones, that have to compete with all sorts of things. And in a funny sense, they're more like movie theaters, like Eric was talking about. They can be social spaces in an important way. And I worry that if we make people used to seeing them in another context altogether, seeing works of art on their screen, if that becomes the norm, if something with all the bells and whistles of of Google Art Project takes over, that this kind of activity will be lost. This is a video that my wife filmed at the Art Institute of Chicago of a great painting by Kai Butt. And it gives you an idea of the really complicated ways in which people interact with physical objects. They're in a group. There's a huge sociability involved, as in the movie theater. That there's something very special that goes on, the kind of exploration that happens with a real work of art. The fact that the figures in the work of art are as big as the people in front of it, which I didn't even realize until I saw that picture. I'd seen that picture hundreds of times in reproduction and didn't realize that relationship. And all of those kind of things, the pacing of interactions with works of art, the way in which you can contemplate in a way you don't on screen, the way in which you can't choose to click on something else, you're stuck in front of it. All of that stuff, I think, is really important for what it is to be art. And I'm just worried, here I am, I adore the access this gives me. But I worry that for a lot of people, especially people who have never been to a museum, in fact, in a way, it's more dangerous for people who don't know museums than for people who do already, that there comes to be a sense that the screen is the natural home of works of art. And then there's the gravy of going to the museum itself. And that's one of the things that I worry about with Google Art Project.
Well, so I can't argue with that example, right? Because I've seen this painting in real life. I'm not going to justify that the on-screen experience is better. But let me try and counter it with an anecdote. So when I moved out of India and started actually going to museums because my friends told me I need to get cultured, I said, okay, let's go. I try to have a conversation in front of the Mona Lisa in Paris. I try to have a conversation at Tate. And every time I got these glares because, at that time I was a very loud, aggressive person. I've toned down. But I got these glares, like, what are you doing? Shh. And just recently, I was showing the Google Art Project to a bunch of kids around 12, 13. And the minute they saw, I think it was The Harvesters and another painting by Vermeer, they started screaming. And I didn't understand what was going on. They started shouting, saying, look at the color. It was just crazy. It was like there was a party happening in front of the screen with these kids. And, so for me, yes, it is important to be in the space, to respect it, to reflect, to contemplate. But there's also a fun, a very human side, which, you can do in front of a screen that you probably might not be comfortable doing in a public space like a museum. So, I don't think there's a right or wrong. I just think both have their place.
Yeah, I guess so, but maybe I'm repeating myself. Let's go to this next
You're not going to
image
give up,
here.
huh?
I'll never give up. I'm trained never to give up. I'm like a Rottweiler. One of the things that I think we've lost track of is that art, in fact, even for someone like me, I spend all my life looking at art and have for decades now, the crucial thing about art, for me, is that it's actually difficult, that it's actually kind of dumb, that to figure out what a work of art means is one of the hardest things there is. And that that quality of being put off by works of art can actually be really positive. That is, the difficulty of works of art, to appreciate not the ease of them, not the fun of zooming in and out, but the fact that they're just insanely ridiculous objects. Why would we look at a piece of wood with some paint slathered on it? That's the basic question you get as soon as you're in front of a work of art. And the greatest experts in the world don't really have an answer for that. And I think that there's something about this kind of encounter, just the person with these weird objects trying to come to grips with them, which is really important. And all of the bells and whistles of the Google Art Project, which I love. I
Blake,
love being
if I could have
zoom
all
in.
these paintings in my house to sit and look at them, I would love it, right? The problem is there's no access. Access is limited, and I agree with you. Like, for me, the most beautiful thing after zooming in 100 times in the starry night, it still completely moves me when I'm standing in front of it. Like, it has never moved me on the computer. But I can't pull it out unless, Kim from MoMA gives it to me and put it in my house, right? And this comes as a close, I would say, second substitute, so to speak. It's not the primary experience. I don't want it to ever become the primary experience.
But one of the weird things that's happened is it's actually started to shape the primary experience. I'll give you an example. Most people, until fairly recently, looked at works of art on slides, right? That's how you saw it in class. And slides, when slides are made from works of art, there's often a very sharp lighting on them. And what's happened is museums are now imitating that lighting on the actual pictures. So in fact, pictures are being made to look more and more like slides instead of the other way around. The lighting on pictures is actually made to make them look like slides in a darkened room. And your Starry Night example is a perfect one. Yes, it's true that Van Gogh liked heavy paint, but the paint that he put on so heavily would have been looked at in a fairly soft light originally. Now museums with Van Goghs put harsher and harsher and harsher light so that there's a big shadow next to every brushstroke. So we've gone nuts with the notion that Van Gogh's about brushstrokes. And the danger, of course, is that Google Art is emphasizing that, it's playing into that problem.
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, I think when you look at something online, you're really left to judge it, for yourself, right? Yes, I went with the brushstroke example, but someone else might not, because I think it just lets you decide what you want. And your example about museums doing what they're doing, I really can't comment on it because I'm not an expert in the area. But I wish they would respect a little bit, of how it's supposed to be viewed based on what experts say, right? I'm not an expert, but yes, sitting at home in my pajamas, looking at the starry night. If it's a brush stroke, if it's a crack in the canvas, if it's just the color, it could be so many things happening to me at the same time. And, sometimes I don't even analyze it. I just let it take over.
That sounds like a good way to open things up to the rest of the audience, I think.
Yeah. So any questions, any concerns?
I felt very compelled to make a comment because I represent both worlds. I work at Google. I studied art history, and in fact, for 17 years, I worked, and I continue to work in education at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. What's interesting for me about this project, precisely to your point, it's about access. People who've never been to a museum before, they're not going to necessarily come to a museum, no matter what we do. The beauty, though, with the art project is that it introduces them to a world that they never have experienced before, and it gives them access, to your point, to that world. In addition to that, to people who are involved in that world and who love it, it gives you closer access to the object under certain lighting and detail that you could never experience in person. So the point is that it doesn't replace the experience, it complements and adds to it a different experience.
Sure, I can buy that. I just worry in general that in our rush to get more people into museums, we're not actually giving them access to the works of art as they really are. We're giving them something else in order to get more people in. So for instance, the example of looking more closely at a work of art than you ever could in a museum. Well, these works of art weren't actually meant to be looked at that closely. It's a little bit like, I don't know, getting to know Shakespeare through one of those lists of how often words occur in Shakespeare, or worse yet, imagine getting to know the beauty of Audrey Hepburn on a dissecting table, right? There's a sense that as we try to get to know more about the objects, we actually get to know less about them. And that's one of my worries about this notion of opening access. I want to increase access to the real experience of museums, not do a sort of a shell game where we replace the real experience with something else that's easier to access or that's differently interesting. Sure.
If they don't want to go, they won't go. But this introduces it to an audience that may never have considered it because of historically what museums represent and the intimidation factor.
Sure.
This removes that. So I think it opens to a wider audience that may never have considered it before.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a rights question. Do the museums worry that you're giving people a really direct access to taking screen grabs and then making their own pieces of art from the originals?
I mean, you have no idea how many hours I spend in negotiations with lawyers at museums. So yes, of course they worry.
But is it
Yeah, they worry.
concern? Do they track things like that? Do they, try to follow?
I mean, there's no easy answer to this, but I think, so one of the things is we really leave the rights discussions between the museums and the rights owners. Google does not get in between that discussion. We just say, give us what you want. So for example, we have certain museums that have just given us 50 pieces because that's all they could feel comfortable giving with the rights situation. I think what's happening is museums themselves are trying to figure out, how does putting up a high-res version of a painting jeopardize other commercial streams, right? They're trying to figure it out. Does it have a correlation? Does it not? And I think, there's a great example. I think, Met has just put up a huge number of their artworks online in high-res for download on their website. I mean, and it's not just the Met. Tate is doing it. They're starting to do it. Now, whether it's good or bad, that's not a question I can answer. But, the concerns are there from a lot of parties in the museums.
remember that the vast majority of works of art ever made in the history of humanity are made long before rights apply. That is, the artists have been dead for much longer than 75 years.
Yep.
And there's been a pernicious tendency in some museums, not the ones you've just mentioned, to try to control objects that are actually in the public domain. So just by controlling physical access to reproductions, they try to control access. And I think that's pernicious. And some museums deliberately say, no, this is in the public domain. Our job is to let people have access to works of art. Therefore, we're going to make these available.
Yep. Any more,
Yep.
or are we?
Yep.
Just, okay.
Is there any effort to bring this to public education and any scalable way for this to be used in schools as part of arts curriculum, or what used to be arts curriculum?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's happening. So I get, so the way the art project works, it's very organic, right? So we are not going and pushing it down, but we've got a lot of teachers actually starting to use it. We've done workshops in the UK where teachers have come in and said, show us all the features, we'll build a class plan. And we're like, okay, fine. But I'm not trying to push it too hard. I rather they accept it if they want it. But I would love it.
I know that in university art history departments, people are using it constantly to get access to things.
All right.
Oh, yeah, I wanted to talk about context. You talked about context in a space, but I think that when it comes to art, there's also context in time and the purpose of why that piece was created. And I think that in museums, you don't get that full experience unless you're with somebody who's very knowledgeable about the piece. And I feel like Google Art, it really helps to explain. I love that about you can see who made this piece, what was he maybe going through in his life or whatever. I think that's a really important piece of appreciating art. So I commend that. I don't know if that, crossed your mind when you created it.
Yeah, it did. I mean, that's why we tried to get museums, I'm going to use a technical word, metadata. We try to encourage them to give us more standardized metadata so that you can really understand a little bit more about this painting. But Blake has a criticism that the project is not curated enough. And we've discussed this offline quite a lot. And so we're trying to see if we can fix. It's not perfect. I've never said it is, but we have to fix some problem.
Yeah, I mean, one of my worries, I thought I had a slide of it, but it's not coming up, is that museums go to such effort to put, oh, here we are. This is the Museum of Modern Art. And you see a Pollock and a de Kooning, and I think that's a Krasner painting. And the Museum of Modern Art has gone to incredible trouble to put together pictures that really speak to each other in important ways. That this experience in a space with these works that have been chosen is very important. And of course, on the Google Art Project, what you do is you look at the Pollock and then you're distracted by a golden scarab from Egypt and you go to that. So some of the knowledge that you get just by seeing the right pictures together can be lost.
Hi, has any museum actually turned you down? And is there any evidence from those who've subscribed that their visitor numbers have gone up in any way? I mean, it's obviously early days, but is there any kind of boost, if you like, to people attending real museums?
So the first question is, have any museums turned us down? Well, we don't have the Louvre. So moving on. I'm kidding. No, most museums don't. It's not about turning down. I think a lot of them play the wait and watch, trying to see what their contemporaries will do. When we first got the first 17, those 17, I really, hats off to them. They were very bold. And after the 17, things just, started getting easier. Now we are 151. We're launching a few more in the next few weeks. So it's starting, but there will always be few that will hold out till the very end. The second question, I don't know if anybody from MoMA or any of our partners are here, but yes, visitor numbers have gone up. We don't track it, but we had, for example, one of our partners at the Uffizi who actually made a statement to the New York Times that as soon as the launch happened, they saw a bump, of course, a significant bump in online website traffic, but also, in footfall, but they couldn't correlate it perfectly. It's a little difficult.
Although let's all remember that one of the most pernicious things in the museum world is a desperate attempt to get numbers up all the time. Museums are too crowded. The last thing the Uffizi needs is more people in the museum, right? And it's a real problem because that's the one thing you can count in museums. It becomes a measure of success, not how long do people spend with pictures, how much they get out of it, are they leaving with better souls than when they went in? All we have is the turnstile turn.
I agree. It's become too data-centric. I agree. There's another gentleman in the back trying to.
Hi, I have a couple of questions actually, but one in regards to smaller institutions. I know I'm from one of the museums that you had approached about this project, and I think one of the problems that we had with it is the way we understood the project, besides copyright, getting copyright yourself, is that the museum would be the ones doing the work and uploading the information and the materials. I don't know if that's true or not, but you can confirm. But I know for smaller institutions that might be limiting because they don't have the resources, or they might be doing other projects concurrently and that's where the resources are going. So I wondered if you would come across those issues with smaller institutions.
Yeah, so the first part of the question is, yes, we do digitize some of the work. So the extreme high zoom gigapixels, what we call that, we have digitized, the Street View we do. But we have a lot of partners out of the 151 that have actually digitized the works themselves and have used our tools and platforms to upload them. Now, why did we go down this route? Very early on, I realized that trying to do operations inside a museum with the photography departments of museums is not something that is a good idea. So, I rather put the onus of things like copyright, the photograph, the quality of the photographs, all these things in the museum's hands because they're the experts in this field, right? So I really wanted to minimize the areas where Google's not an expert on and focus on the areas where Google's an expert on, which is build scalable platforms. So, for example, one of the ways that a lot of the smaller museums joined the project was because we built this content management, I hate using the content management system word, but let's call it a dashboard. We built this dashboard, which is really, really a simple, like, upload single artworks one by one, like using Google Docs or something, right? And that really helped them because they realized they don't have to have some huge training, pay a software license, none of that was involved. But I agree with you, it is going to be a challenge, but more and more I've seen examples where small museums are partnering with either universities to do the digitization, private donors to do the digitization, and that's a great combination.
Thank you very much. I think we're done.
I just had one more
We take
comment
one more quick question. One very quickly, yes.
I know there's been other museums. The museum world is a very complex place. I know there's various other institutions that try to partner up and do similar projects. I was just wondering if you looked into those projects when you were doing the Google Art project.
Well, see, the beauty of not coming from the sector is I have no legacy, right? So I just started by just talking to the Tate and the Met and MoMA, and then they told me there have been some efforts, there's Europeana in Europe, which is also trying to do something. And I said, that's fantastic, more the merrier, and let's try and see if we can bring something different to the table. And the idea here was really the immersive experience with the Street View, because that's something that people weren't doing. They were collaborating more on metadata standards and things like that.
Wonderful. Amit, thank you very much for
Thanks,
the Google
Blake.
Art project. I look forward to using it.
Thank you very much.